You think you're safe, don't you? Marcus whispered to himself as he watched the tower's security cameras blink on the screen. The Billionaire CEO, Richard Hawkins, passed by without a second glance, his head held high, his air of superiority filling the marble hallway. It was just another ordinary day for him, a day filled with meetings and lavish business deals. But for Marcus, the head security guard, it was a day that would change everything. Marcus had seen the signs, subtle, unnoticed, but dangerous. An odd pattern of behavior, odd signals flashing through the security system. It wasn't just another routine day. He knew the hacker was inside. The tower's most valuable secrets were about to be stolen. Marcus' fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes narrowing as he traced the breach. Richard, the arrogant billionaire, had no idea that his world was about to crumble. Marcus had warned him before, spoken up when others wouldn't, but Richard never took him seriously, always brushing him off like a nobody, a mere shadow in the background. But Marcus wasn't going to be ignored this time. He could feel the tension rising in his chest as he checked the alarms, the security grids, the floors. Someone had bypassed the system, the very same system that Richard paid millions for. The room froze when Marcus rushed into the boardroom, his presence commanding attention for the first time. He locked eyes with Richard, standing tall despite the overwhelming tension in the air. "Your company is compromised," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard turned, his face momentarily blank. Then confusion flickered in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "You're just the guard," he said, dismissing him once more, as he always did. But Marcus didn't back down. He had the proof, the evidence that would save everything. "I'm the one who caught the breach. I'm the one who can stop it." Marcus stepped closer, showing the files on his tablet. The hacker was still in the system, taking everything they could. Richard blinked, then stepped forward, his tone shifting from arrogant disbelief to cautious concern. "Show me." As Marcus explained the severity of the situation, the realization began to hit Richard. The arrogance he once wore like a shield was slowly replaced by a flicker of fear. Marcus wasn't just the security guard anymore. He was the hero of the day, the man who could prevent disaster. The hacker was too deep into the system for anyone else to stop. It was only Marcus who understood it, who saw through the cracks, who had the knowledge and skill to act. Richard's eyes widened as he glanced around the room. The executives had been listening, and now they were looking at him, waiting for his reaction. This was his moment, his chance to do what he always avoided. Listen to someone who wasn't rich, someone who had always been overlooked. Marcus clicked a few more keys on his tablet. The hacker was out. The system was locked. Richard exhaled, the tension in his body melting away. "You saved us," he muttered, still in disbelief. But Marcus didn't look at him. He wasn't seeking praise. He wasn't doing this for recognition. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. In the end, Marcus didn't need Richard's approval. He had saved the day, and for once, he knew it was enough. Marcus didn't feel relief as the alarms finally stopped ringing. The tension was still thick in the air. Richard Hawkins stood there, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the screen, processing the reality that the very thing he'd been ignoring had almost destroyed everything. The room was full of the quiet hum of disbelief, a silence broken only by Marcus' steady breathing. "How?" Richard finally asked, his voice edged with both awe and disbelief. Marcus didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his eyes scanning the screens. "It's not the first time I've seen something like this," Marcus said quietly. Richard, still standing in front of the tablet Marcus had handed him, turned his head to look at him. The billionaire couldn't shake the feeling that he'd underestimated the man in front of him his entire career. "And you've been doing this all along?" Richard asked. Marcus nodded, his gaze never leaving the screen. "I'm not just a guard, Mr. Hawkins. I've been working security here for years. I know this. Building better than anyone. I see things others don't." He paused, the weight of his words sinking in. "The company's not as secure as you think." Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as the full scope of Marcus' words hit him. He knew the hacker was only the beginning. Marcus wasn't just talking about a single breach. He was talking about a deep flaw, a crack in the foundation of everything Richard had built. The billionaire took a deep breath, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of respect for the man who had saved him. "I've been wrong," Richard admitted, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "You've been right all along, Marcus. But I didn't listen. Marcus just nodded again. He wasn't here for apologies. He didn't want praise. He just wanted to do his job and keep the people he cared about safe. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again, Richard promised, his voice firm. Marcus glanced at him, his expression unreadable. It's not about making sure it doesn't happen again, sir. It's about learning from it. He turned away from the screen, heading for the door. We need to move faster. This isn't just about one breach. It's about a complete overhaul. If you want to fix this, you're going to need someone who actually knows how your systems work. Someone who isn't afraid to speak up when something's wrong. Richard stood there, watching him go, and for the first time in a long while, he was questioning his own authority. The tower, his empire, had almost crumbled, and the only reason it was still standing was because Marcus, a man he had dismissed as insignificant, had stepped up and saved everything. As the elevator doors closed behind Marcus, Richard finally let out a long breath, the weight of the day crashing down on him. It wasn't just the hacker he needed to worry about anymore. It was everything he had ignored for so long. The systems, the people, the small cracks that, if left unchecked, would eventually bring everything down. And for the first time, he realized Marcus wasn't just a guard. He was the key to saving it all. Marcus had expected Richard's words, but he hadn't expected them to feel so hollow. The billionaire was apologizing, sure, but Marcus knew better than to believe that would change anything. Richard's empire was built on a foundation of arrogance and neglect, and one apology wouldn't fix that. As Marcus stood at the elevator, his mind racing with the thought of what came next, he couldn't help but wonder if Richard had truly learned anything from the experience, or if it was just another attempt to keep his status intact. Marcus wasn't in this for the praise. He wasn't here for the recognition. He was here because someone had to be the one to step up. He pressed the button to go down, and as the doors closed, he could feel the weight of the decisions ahead of him. The tower was safe for now, but for how long? How many more cracks in the system were waiting to be discovered? He knew the answer. Too many. The next few days passed in a blur. Richard had promised change, but Marcus had seen enough in his time at the tower to know that words were just words. The real change came from action. Late one night, as Marcus was leaving the building, he was stopped by one of the junior executives, a nervous-looking man named Lucas. "Marcus," Lucas said, his voice tentative. "Can we talk for a second?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sure," he replied. "What's up?" Lucas hesitated, then glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was watching. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did. You saved us all." Marcus nodded, not wanting to make a big deal of it. "It's my job," he said simply. "But I know Richard's been on edge since the breach, and he's been asking about you." Marcus felt a shift in the air, a change that was subtle, but unmistakable. Richard had been asking about him. Not for his skills, not for his abilities as a security guard, but as someone who had seen through the cracks in his empire. "I don't want any special treatment," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I don't need Richard's approval or anyone else's. I just want to do my job." Lucas nodded quickly, clearly relieved. Of course. But I think you should know that he's thinking differently now. He knows he's been wrong. He's trying to make things right." Marcus wasn't convinced. People didn't change that easily, especially not someone like Richard Hawkins. But he didn't say that. Instead, he just nodded and gave Lucas a curt smile. "We'll see," he said. The next morning, Marcus received a message from Richard's office. It was short, simple, and to the point. "Meet me in my office at 2 p.m. today." As the time drew nearer, Marcus found himself standing outside Richard's office, his mind running through every possible scenario. What could Richard want now? Was this just another attempt to sweep things under the rug, or was there a real chance for change? Marcus wasn't sure. But as the door opened and Richard greeted him with a hesitant smile, he knew one thing for certain. The real test was about to begin. Marcus stepped into Richard's office, his eyes scanning the room as he adjusted to the quiet, high-end luxury that contrasted with the stark reality he had just faced in the building's security room. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and a large mahogany desk sat in the center. Richard stood by the window, his back to Marcus, looking out over the city below. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the air was palpable. Richard turned slowly, offering a stiff smile. "Marcus, thank you for coming. Please, sit down." Marcus didn't hesitate. He sat across from Richard's desk, folding his hands together. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice steady. Richard's expression shifted slightly, as if he were gathering his thoughts. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how things went down. His voice faltered, the walls of his usual confidence cracking. You were right. I've been blind to a lot of things that I should have noticed long ago. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He wasn't here to accept apologies. I've always believed in control, Marcus. In keeping everything in order, in being the one who calls the shots. Richard continued, his gaze intense. But you, he paused, searching for the right words. You showed me that there's more to leadership than just authority. You showed me that being in charge isn't just about making decisions from the top. It's about listening, being aware of the people who make everything work. Marcus could see the struggle in Richard's eyes, the conflict between his pride and his growing realization. What do you want, Richard? Marcus asked, his voice still measured. Richard hesitated, then looked directly at him. I want to change. I want to make this company better. I want to be better. And I need your help to do that. Marcus didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure if this was just another empty promise or if Richard truly meant what he was saying. I can't do this alone, Richard added, his voice softer now. I need someone who understands what it means to lead with integrity. Someone who isn't afraid to speak the truth even when it's uncomfortable. I want you to be that person, Marcus. The words hung in the air, the weight of them sinking in. Marcus could feel the pull of the offer, but something in him hesitated. He had seen men like Richard before. People who spoke of change, but never followed through. I've spent my whole life watching people like you, Marcus said quietly. People who think they can control everything with money, with power. But they forget that power is built on the people around them. You can't control what you don't understand. Richard nodded slowly, his face drawn. I get it now. And I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to start over. Marcus studied him for a moment. This was a pivotal moment. One where he could walk away, knowing that Richard would probably return to his old ways. Or he could take the chance, help guide him, and try to bring about real change. Marcus stood up, his decision made. I'll help you. But don't think for a second this is going to be easy. You'll have to prove to me that you're serious. And that means showing me actions, not just words. Richard stood, his posture straightening with a new resolve. You have my word, he said. Thank you, Marcus. As Marcus turned to leave, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time, there was hope in the air. It wasn't just about saving the company anymore. It was about saving something much bigger, the chance for real change. The days that followed were full of meetings, updates, and plans to restructure. Richard had promised change, but Marcus knew better than to trust in promises alone. He had been in this game long enough to see people say one thing and do another. It was different now, though. He could see the subtle shifts in Richard's behavior, the small adjustments in his leadership style. He was starting to listen. He was starting to act. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself in more and more meetings with the executives, giving his input, offering advice. Richard had made him part of the team, a decision that shocked many people within the company. To some, Marcus was still just the security guard, the man who'd once been invisible. But to Richard, he was now an integral part of the future of the company. Things were changing, slowly but surely. But as much as Richard had begun to listen, Marcus could still sense the old habits lingering. One afternoon, as Marcus sat in his office, reviewing security reports, he received a message from Richard. Can you meet me in my office at 3 p.m. today? There's something we need to discuss. Marcus's mind raced as he closed his laptop and made his way upstairs. The air in the hallway felt different now, less tense, but still charged with uncertainty. When he walked into Richard's office, the billionaire was standing by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Marcus, Richard began, his voice quiet but steady. We've made some progress, haven't we? Marcus nodded, his arms crossed. We've made progress, but it's not enough. Not yet. Richard turned to face him, a faint smile on his lips. You're right. It's never enough. There was a pause before Richard continued. I've been thinking. There's a big project coming up. A merger that could change everything for this company. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And you want my help? Richard nodded. I trust you, Marcus. I want you to be part of this. Your perspective matters. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Marcus wasn't sure if Richard had truly changed or if this was just another way to keep up appearances. But there was something in his eyes that made Marcus believe he might be sincere. I'll help, Marcus said, his voice firm. But this time, It's not just about fixing things from the outside. We need to look at the core of this company, the way we treat people, the way we run things. It's time to really change, not just patch things up. Richard's expression softened. I know, and I'm ready. Marcus felt a flicker of something. Hope, maybe. For the first time, he believed Richard when he said that. They shook hands, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. As Marcus left Richard's office, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was on the horizon. This wasn't just about saving the company anymore. It was about changing the entire culture, the way people were treated, the way things were done. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus was hopeful. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But maybe, just maybe, they could get it right. The days following their conversation in Richard's office were filled with rapid change. Marcus could feel it in the air. Small but significant shifts were happening within the company. He was no longer just the security guard. He was part of the discussions that mattered. The meetings grew longer, the challenges bigger, but so did the sense of purpose. Richard had truly made an effort to listen, and that made all the difference. The project they were working on, the merger, was a monumental one. It could potentially make or break the company, and Marcus knew this was their chance to reshape the future, not just for the company, but for the people who worked there. He wasn't going to let it slip away. But there were moments when the old habits crept back in. Richard, for all his new intentions, still held onto his position of power. He was still the billionaire, the man who called the shots, and there were times when his arrogance resurfaced. It was in the way he dismissed people's concerns or in his sudden bursts of frustration when things weren't moving quickly enough. Marcus noticed the pattern. For a moment, he considered stepping back. But he couldn't. Not when he had come this far. Not when he saw the potential for something real. It was clear to Marcus now. The company needed to evolve, and that meant challenging the very structures that had been in place for years. One afternoon, Marcus was called into another meeting. This time, it wasn't just with Richard. There were several high-level executives in the room, the very people who had dismissed him in the past. They were now looking to him for advice, and it made him uneasy. He wasn't used to this level of attention, but he also knew it was his chance to make a difference. As the meeting began, the topic turned to the upcoming merger, and the room grew tense. Everyone had their own ideas on how to proceed, but there was one glaring issue that no one was addressing. We're not thinking about the people. Marcus spoke up, his voice calm but firm. We're focused on the numbers, the profit margins, the logistics. But what about the employees? What about the people who keep this company running every day? The room fell silent. Marcus could feel the weight of their gaze on him, the skepticism in their eyes. Richard was quiet for a moment, then looked at him. Go on, he said. You're right, Marcus continued. You can't just look at this merger as a financial transaction. It's a human one too. If we don't consider how the employees will be affected, if we don't treat them with the respect they deserve, we'll fail. No one will stay. No one will trust us. There was a pause. Then one of the executives spoke up. But we've already made the cuts. We've streamlined the operations. What else can we do? Marcus stood up, his eyes scanning the room. We need to be transparent. We need to engage with the employees, show them that we're not just in this for ourselves. We have to build trust, not just numbers. That's the only way this merger will work. Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. I think you're right, he said slowly. But this is a big step, Marcus. It means changing the way we do business. Marcus nodded. It's a risk, but it's the only risk worth taking. The meeting ended soon after, but Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be setbacks. But for the first time, he felt like the company was moving in the right direction. It wasn't just about profits anymore. It was about people. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. The following weeks were a whirlwind of change. The company's culture was slowly shifting, and for the first time in years, Marcus could feel the difference. Employees were starting to speak up, share their ideas, and even challenge the status quo, something that had never happened before. The town hall meetings, once cold and impersonal, were now filled with real conversations. It was clear that Richard was committed to making this work, but Marcus knew that the hard part was far from over. One morning, as Marcus walked through the building, he noticed something different. The atmosphere was lighter, the employees seemed more engaged, and the usual tension that had hung in the air for years had dissipated. He wasn't sure if it was the new policies or the genuine effort from Richard, but he knew it was a step in the right direction. However, the true test came when they began preparing for the final stages of the merger. There were moments when Richard would still fall back into old habits, moments when his impatience would flare up. Marcus could feel the familiar tension rise, but he had learned to manage it. He wasn't going to let this slip away. He wasn't going to let the progress they'd made go to waste. "We can't afford to make the same mistakes again," Marcus said, standing in front of Richard's office one afternoon. "We've come this far, but if we don't follow through, all of this is for nothing." Richard looked at him, the weight of the situation clear in his eyes. "I know," he said quietly, "but it's hard, Marcus. There are so many things pulling in different directions. The pressure is immense." Marcus nodded, understanding all too well. The pressure was indeed immense. The company was on the verge of becoming something different, but the risks were higher than ever. One wrong move, and they could lose everything. "It's about making the right decisions, Richard. It's about doing what's best for everyone, not just the numbers on a balance sheet," Marcus said firmly. "We've been so focused on profits for so long that we've forgotten what really matters. People. We need to keep that at the center of everything we do." Richard looked at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You're right," he said. "I don't want to go back to the way things were. I don't want to lose everything we've worked for." Marcus could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time, he felt like Richard wasn't just saying the right things to appease him. He was truly committed. "Then we keep pushing forward," Marcus said. "We stay true to the principles we've set, and we don't let the pressure break us. We've come this far, and we can't stop now." The weight in the room seemed to lift, if only slightly, but it was enough. They were on the right path. Marcus knew that the journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The company had changed. Richard had changed. And maybe, just maybe, they were finally heading toward a future that was built on something real, something lasting. As Marcus walked out of Richard's office, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had a long road ahead of them, but for the first time, the future seemed bright. The company was on the brink of a new beginning. Marcus could feel the momentum building every day. The team was more unified than ever, with Richard finally taking the lead in a way that felt genuine. The air felt different now, less tense, more hopeful. But Marcus knew that hope alone wouldn't carry them through. They were preparing for the final stage of the merger, and the stakes had never been higher. As the days passed, Marcus found himself in countless meetings, each more critical than the last. The executives, who had once dismissed him, now looked to him for guidance. It was both humbling and overwhelming. Yet, through it all, Marcus remained focused. He knew that the real test would come when the merger was finalized and the dust settled. Would Richard follow through on his promises, or would the pressure drive him back to his old ways? Marcus couldn't afford to find out the hard way. One evening, as the team gathered in the conference room to review the final merger documents, Marcus noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Richard seemed more relaxed, more engaged, as he listened intently to the feedback from the team. It was a far cry from the cold, detached billionaire Marcus had met months ago. "What do you think, Marcus?" Richard asked, his voice steady. The question took Marcus by surprise. "About the merger?" he asked, meeting Richard's gaze. Richard nodded. "We've made all the necessary changes. It's ready, but I want to know what you think. I want your opinion on how this will affect the people. Not the numbers, not the profit. The people." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. For a moment, he was speechless. Richard was asking for his opinion, for his insight on something that had always been secondary in the past, something Marcus had fought for all along. "I think we're on the right track," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But we need to make sure we're ready to follow through on our promises. The real work starts after the merger is complete. It's about keeping the trust of the people. It's about making sure they know they matter." Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "You're right," he said quietly. "This isn't just about a merger. It's about changing the culture. We can't stop here." Marcus nodded. "No, we can't. The moment we stop pushing for change is the moment we lose everything we've worked for." Richard's eyes met Marcus's, and for the first time, Marcus saw the weight of responsibility in them. This wasn't just about corporate success anymore. It was about building something that would last, a legacy of integrity and change. "I'm glad you're with us, Marcus," Richard said, his voice sincere. Marcus didn't smile, but the faintest hint of pride bubbled up inside him. He had always known that real change would come from within. And now, it seemed like it was finally happening. The merger was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. Marcus had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. They were building something real, and that was worth fighting for. As the months passed, the company continued to evolve. The merger had been finalized, and the changes were starting to take shape. But with change came challenges, and Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. Richard had shown that he was willing to listen, but now they had to prove that the transformation was more than just words. Marcus found himself at the center of it all. The trust he had built with Richard and the other executives was growing, and it felt like things were finally aligning in the right direction. But there were still moments of doubt. One afternoon, as Marcus walked through the building, he noticed a group of employees gathered around a conference table. They were talking about the new policies, discussing the changes that had been promised, and Marcus could sense the skepticism in the air. They weren't convinced. "It's easy to talk about change," one of the employees said, his voice low. "But when it comes down to it, it's all about results. How are we supposed to trust that things are actually different?" Marcus stopped in his tracks. He knew the concern was valid. People could say they wanted change, but unless they saw real, tangible results, they would always be doubtful. The company had promised to treat employees with more respect, to listen to their concerns, and to create a culture of transparency. But it was up to everyone in that room to make sure those promises weren't just empty words. Marcus walked into the room, his presence commanding attention. "I understand your concerns," he said, his voice steady. "And I'm here to tell you that this is real. But it's not just about the promises made by Richard or anyone else. It's about all of us. Change starts with us, and it's going to take time. But we're in this together." The room fell silent. Marcus could feel the weight of their eyes on him, waiting for him to prove his words. He knew it wasn't enough to just speak. He had to show them that the company was genuinely different. If we want to build trust, we have to do it together. That means transparency, communication, and accountability. And that's what we're working on every single day. Slowly, one by one, the employees nodded. It wasn't a complete shift in perspective, but it was a start. Marcus could feel the change, even if it was small. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Richard had put his trust in him, and now Marcus had to put his trust in the people around him. This was their journey together, and Marcus wasn't going to back down now. As the days went on, Marcus saw more and more signs that the culture was truly shifting. Employees were coming forward with their ideas, sharing their thoughts in meetings without fear of being dismissed. Richard was present,